A Sunday in summer, heat shimmering off the pavement. The kind of afternoon that makes everything feel slow and golden and just slightly too bright. Caleb Merritt was holding 2 ice cream cones and losing a negotiation with a 7-year-old. "The sprinkles are the best part," his daughter insisted, standing on the bench beside him with the absolute authority of someone who has never once been wrong about dessert. "You're getting sprinkles," he said. "You already got sprinkles." More sprinkles. Across the plaza, a woman's voice cracked. Not loud, barely above the ambient noise of the crowd, but something about the pitch made Caleb look up. She was standing maybe 30 feet away. Dark hair, simple dress. The man in front of her was speaking with his hands, gesturing wide, the way people do when they're performing for an audience and not actually talking to the person in front of them. "Bah," his daughter said, the old habit. Slipping out, the word she still used sometimes when she forgot to be American. "Why is that lady crying?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched the man lean in closer, watched the woman press her lips together. He set down the ice cream. "Stay here," he said. His name was Caleb Merritt. 34 years old. 5'11" on a good morning. Hands that had been useful in several different careers, none of which he talked about much. Right now, officially, he was a mechanic at Harlow Auto on the east side of the city. Good work, honest work, the kind where you knew exactly what you'd fixed at the end of the day and nobody argued about whether you'd done it right. His daughter was Nora, 7 years old, opinionated about sprinkles, currently sitting on a plaza bench in Riverside Market District holding 2 rapidly melting ice cream cones with the stoic patience of someone who had been raised to handle inconvenience without complaint. That was mostly his doing. Nora had learned early that her father was the kind of man who noticed things and then acted on what he noticed. And that meant sometimes you held the ice cream while he went and did something. She didn't mind. She had learned it meant he was being good. Caleb had been a single father for 4 years. Nora's mother, Claire, had left when Nora was 3, not dramatically, not after a great fight, just quietly and then completely, the way some people exit when they realize they've been cast in a life that doesn't fit them. He didn't hate Claire for it. Hating took energy he didn't have. What he had was Nora, a 2-bedroom apartment on Delancey Street, a job with decent hours and a boss who didn't ask questions when he needed to leave early for a school thing. And Sundays were theirs. No exceptions, every week, wherever they wanted to go. Today had been Nora's pick. Riverside Market, because they had the ice cream cart with the real sugar cones and also a man who did balloon animals, and Nora had been planning this specific Sunday for 11 days. They'd gotten the ice cream. They'd gotten a balloon poodle that Nora had named Margaret. Everything had been going exactly right. And then Caleb had looked up across the plaza. The woman's name was Vivian Hartwell. He didn't know that yet. What he knew was what he could see. A woman in her early 30s, dressed simply in a pale linen dress that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget but didn't look it, holding a small canvas bag against her side, the way people hold things when they need something to grip, and a man standing too close to her, talking too loud. The man was handsome in the specific way that required maintenance. Good suit, hair that had been arranged rather than simply cut. He was pointing at her as he spoke, and the crowd around them was doing that thing crowds do, pretending not to watch while watching. "Don't even know why I'm surprised," the man was saying. "You've always been like this. Ice, completely unreachable. You wonder why people leave you." Vivienne said something quiet. Caleb couldn't hear it. "No," the man said, louder now, leaning in. "You don't get to do the quiet thing right now. I'm talking to you. In front of all these people, I'm telling you you are cold, Vivienne. You are empty, and whoever comes after me is going to find that out the same way I did." Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright, with something that wasn't quite tears, but was working in that direction. She didn't say anything, and the crowd kept not watching. Caleb had spent years, more years than he talked about, in situations where the calculation was, do I act or do I not act? He had learned, in those years, that most people default to inaction, because action has costs, and inaction feels safer. He had also learned that inaction has costs too. They're just harder to see in the moment. He crossed the plaza in 8 steps. The man's name, Caleb would later learn, was Preston Ault. He came from old money, not the subtle, understated kind, but the loud, renovated kind. The kind that needed to be reminded of itself regularly. He'd grown up in Fairmont Hills and had spent the better part of his adult life leveraging one family connection to the next, building a career that was mostly about being in the right rooms rather than being useful in them. He and Vivian had dated for 8 months. Or rather, Preston had dated Vivian, and Vivian had been in proximity to Preston while making the mistake of believing that proximity and intimacy were the same thing. She knew, standing there in the Riverside Market Plaza on that Sunday afternoon, that the mistake had not been Preston specifically. The mistake had been a pattern she'd been running for years. The belief that if she kept herself contained and professional and controlled enough, relationships would sort themselves out around her like water finding its level. Preston had found a different level. Specifically, a 26-year-old named Brooke, who worked in events at the Harrington Hotel, and who, according to Preston, laughed at his jokes without looking like she was calculating something at the same time. "You want to know what Brooke has that you don't," Preston was saying now, and Vivian could feel the specific humiliation of being discussed like an object. "Here is the model, here are its deficiencies, here is why we're moving to the upgrade." She had a response. Several, actually. She ran a company with 4,000 employees. She had testified before a Senate subcommittee on infrastructure finance. She could articulate Preston's fundamental psychological issues, his dependency on external validation, his weaponized charm, in language a first-year therapist would find impressive. She didn't say any of it, because she was standing in a public plaza and there were people watching, and she had spent her entire adult life keeping Vivian Hartwell, the private person, ruthlessly separate from Vivian Hartwell, the public figure, and this moment Preston dismantling her in front of strangers felt like a lock being forced. "Warmth," Preston said. "She has warmth. Something you—" "Sorry," a voice said. Preston stopped. Vivian looked up. The man who had appeared beside her was not what anyone would call immediately remarkable. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing a gray t-shirt and dark jeans. His hair was a little too long on top. He had a face that suggested things had happened to it, not in a dramatic way, just in the way that faces accumulate weather over time. He was looking at her. "Sorry, I'm late," he said. And his voice was very calm. Later, much later, Vivian would try to reconstruct the logic of what happened in the next 30 seconds, and she would fail, because there was no logic. Logic doesn't cover a stranger crossing a crowded plaza to stand beside a woman he's never met and say, "Sorry, I'm late," with the total confidence of someone who has been expected. Preston stared at the man. "Who are you?" The man ignored him. He was looking at Vivian. "You okay?" he said, very quietly, just to her. She should have said, "I don't know you." She should have said, "This is a misunderstanding." She should have said any of the 100 true things that were true. Instead, she heard herself say, "I am now." She didn't know why. She would spend several days afterward trying to figure out why. The man's hand came up and very carefully tucked a strand of hair back from her face. The gesture was so unhurried and so deliberate that Preston stopped speaking entirely, which was not something Preston did. Then the man turned to Preston. "She doesn't need this," he said. "She doesn't need you. You should go." "Excuse me," Preston began. "You should go," the man said again, in exactly the same tone. And something about the exact sameness of it, no escalation, no performance, just a statement that functioned like a closed door, made Preston's next sentence die somewhere in his chest. The crowd had gone quiet. Not the guilty not watching from before. Actually quiet. Then the man turned back to Vivian, and she saw something in his face, not confidence exactly, more like decision, and then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was brief. It was not nothing. His hand was at her jaw, light, and his mouth was warm. And Vivian Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Infrastructure Group, fourth on Business Quarterly's Most Powerful Women in Industry list, stood in a public plaza on a Sunday afternoon and was kissed by a stranger she had never seen before in her life. When he pulled back, his eyes met hers for a half-second. There was a question in them, was that okay, and she found herself answering it by not stepping back. From somewhere behind him, a small voice said, "Bah, the ice cream is melting." The man closed his eyes briefly, turned around. A little girl was standing there with 2 ice cream cones, one in each hand, both listing badly to the left. She was looking at the scene with the calm, assessing gaze of a 7-year-old who has decided to withhold judgment until she has more data. "Nora," the man said, "I told you to stay on the bench." "I did stay on the bench," Nora said. "And then I walked over here. Those are different." Preston looked from the man to the child to Vivian. For the first time in the 8 months Vivian had known him, he appeared to have nothing to say. He left. They found a table at the edge of the market, under an umbrella, away from the main crowd. "Caleb," he introduced himself. Finally, feeling slightly absurd, used 3 napkins on the ice cream situation while Nora ate with the focused efficiency of someone reclaiming lost time. Vivian sat across from them. She hadn't meant to sit down. She had meant to thank the man and go. She had a car waiting 2 blocks away. She had a phone full of Sunday messages that had nothing to do with Sunday and everything to do with the week ahead. She sat down anyway. "I'm sorry about that," Caleb said. He made a brief gesture that seemed to indicate the kiss. "The whole thing I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking something," Vivian said. "My daughter asked why nobody was helping you." Vivian looked at Nora, who looked back at her with complete composure. "That's a good reason," Vivian said. "It's the only reason I have," he said. He was scrubbing at a spot of strawberry ice cream on his forearm. "Are you all right?" "He wasn't. He didn't. He was just talking," she said. "Preston is very good at talking." "Is he your—" "Was," she said, past tense. He nodded. He didn't push. She noticed that he didn't push. In her experience, most men found the negative space in a conversation and filled it aggressively with follow-up questions and offers of opinion. This man simply accepted the information and returned to the ice cream problem. "What do you do?" she asked, because she genuinely didn't know and found that she wanted to. "Mechanic," he said. "East Side. Harlow Auto." She nodded. "And before that?" He looked up at her. "A beat," Nora said, without looking up from her ice cream. "Ba used to be in the military," Caleb said. "Nora." "You did," Nora said reasonably. "That's not a secret." Vivian looked at him. He met her eyes once, then looked back at the table. There was something in his expression that was not embarrassment but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who has information they have decided to carry quietly. "I need to ask you something," Vivian said. "Okay. He has business connections I need to manage carefully. He sits on the board of 2 companies that are relevant to a transaction I'm closing. If he thinks I've moved on, it changes his incentive structure." Caleb was quiet. He was watching her. "I know this is strange," she said. "I know you don't know me, but would you be willing to appear at one event? Just one. As someone I'm seeing—" "Silence," Nora said. "She smells nice, Ba." Caleb looked at his daughter for a long moment. "I'm not an actor," he said to Vivian. "I'm not asking you to act," she said. "I'm asking you to show up." He rubbed his jaw, looked at Nora, looked back at Vivian. "One event," he said finally. "One," she agreed. She reached into her canvas bag and produced a card, matte black, minimalist, just a name and a number. She slid it across the table. He picked it up, looked at it. For the first time, his expression shifted into something that wasn't quite readable. "Hartwell Infrastructure Group," he said. "You're Vivian Hartwell." "I am." A pause. "Okay," he said, and he put the card in his pocket. He looked her up on his phone in the Harlow Auto parking lot the following Monday morning before his shift. Vivienne Hartwell, 33. CEO and majority shareholder of Hartwell Infrastructure Group, a privately held infrastructure and logistics company with operations in 14 states, net worth estimated at $2.1 billion. Named to Business Quarterly's Most Powerful Women in Industry list for the third consecutive year. Notoriously private. Rarely photographed. No confirmed relationships on record. He put his phone in his pocket. He stood in the parking lot for another minute. He was a mechanic who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on Delancey Street. He drove a 9-year-old truck. His most valuable possession was a tool set his grandfather had left him, which was worth maybe $800 if you found the right buyer. He had kissed a billionaire in a plaza and agreed to pretend to be her boyfriend. He went to work. She called him Thursday. "The event is Saturday," she said, without preamble. "A dinner. Industry people. Preston will be there with his associates." "Okay," he said. "You'll need," she hesitated. "There's a dress code." "I have a suit," he said. A pause. "Of course. What time?" She gave him the details. He wrote them on the back of a receipt he found in his truck's cup holder. He didn't tell her that he'd had to arrange for Mrs. Paulson next door to stay with Nora, which Mrs. Paulson had been happy to do, but which had involved a 20-minute conversation about whether Nora was eating enough vegetables, which Caleb was not equipped to have on a Thursday evening. He didn't tell her any of that because it wasn't relevant. He showed up Saturday at 7:15, parking his truck 2 blocks from the Meridian Club because the valet situation made him uncomfortable. He walked in through the main entrance. A woman in a black dress was waiting near the lobby, young, professional, watching the door. "Mr. Merritt?" she said. "Miss Hartwell is upstairs." "I'm Dana, her assistant. I'll take you up." The elevator was glass. The club occupied the top 3 floors of a building in the financial district, and as they rose, Caleb could see the city spreading out below the river. The bridges, the grid of streets that he knew from the ground level, made unfamiliar from above. He found, to his mild surprise, that he wasn't nervous. He had been in more difficult rooms than this. The doors opened. And there was Vivienne. She was wearing dark blue. Her hair was up. She looked entirely different from the woman in the linen dress in the plaza, and entirely the same, and Caleb had the specific sensation of recognizing something he hadn't known he'd memorized. She looked at his suit. Something in her face relaxed. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. The dinner was 12 people around an oval table in a private room with a view of the city. Caleb counted. 4 men who introduced themselves by their companies before their names. 2 women who were either lawyers or investors, he couldn't determine which. A city council member, Preston Alt, at the far end of the table, with a woman beside him who laughed at everything he said. Caleb sat next to Vivienne. He did not talk much. This was not a social deficiency, it was a tactical choice. He listened. He ate well. He asked the city council member a specific question about the new port expansion project that the man clearly hadn't expected from someone at this table, and they had a brief, genuine conversation about it, and then Caleb returned to listening. He watched the room. He watched the way Vivienne moved through the dinner, the specific precision of her social operation, the way she directed conversation without appearing to, the way she kept 2 separate tracks running simultaneously, one visible, warm, engaged, and one interior, calculating, strategic. He recognized it. He'd operated the same way himself, in different rooms, for different reasons, for years. After dessert, when the room had rearranged itself into small clusters, Preston appeared at Caleb's elbow. "Interesting choice," Preston said, smiling. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "She goes from me to, what is it you do exactly?" "Mechanic," Caleb said. "Right." The smile held. "And how did you 2 meet?" "A plaza," Caleb said. "On a Sunday. Preston looked at him for a long moment. Caleb looked back. He'd been looked at by more intimidating people than Preston Alt, and none of them had managed to move him. "She's complicated," Preston said, lowering his voice. "You should know that. She'll hold you at arm's length forever and make it feel like it's your fault." "Thanks for the advice," Caleb said. He turned away. On the ride down in the elevator afterward, Vivienne said, "You handled that well." "Preston?" "All of it." Caleb shrugged. "I've been in rooms." She looked at him sideways. The elevator was glass again. "The city below." "Where?" she said. He didn't answer right away. "Then the army. Then some other things." "It was a while ago." "The other things?" she said carefully. "Were they?" "They were fine," he said. "And then I had Nora." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. "The arrangement," she said. "I told you one event." "You did. I may need more than one event." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the lobby floor, which he had learned, over the course of one dinner, was something she did when she was saying something she hadn't entirely planned to say. "I'll think about it," he said. Preston Alt was not, by nature, a man who accepted loss gracefully. He had spent his adult life in an environment where outcomes could be managed if you applied the right pressure to the right points. He had learned this from his father, who had learned it from his father, in the particular inheritance of men who had always been permitted to get what they wanted by virtue of wanting it loudly enough. Vivienne had gotten away. That was unacceptable on its own. Vivienne had replaced him with a mechanic. That was something else entirely. Preston hired a private research firm within a week. He wanted everything on Caleb Merritt: employment history, financial situation, background, relationships, everything. He wasn't specific about what he intended to do with it. He would know when he saw it. The report came back 14 days later. Most of it was unremarkable. Merritt, Caleb James. Born in Harrisburg. Army service, 8 years. The file was partially redacted in ways that the research firm flagged as unusual. After his discharge, several years of employment history that was thin in the civilian record but dense in the gaps. Single father. The daughter's mother was not in the picture. Currently working at Harlow Auto, East Side. Income modest. Apartment on Delancey Street. No criminal record. No debt beyond standard. The redacted portions of the military file bothered Preston. He had paid for a thorough report. Redactions were not thorough. He called the firm back. "What's behind the redactions?" "We don't know," the contact said. That level of classification on a discharge record usually means federal contractor work after separation. Sometimes protection detail, sometimes other things. "Other things," Preston repeated. "We can keep looking, but..." "Keep looking," Preston said. In the meantime, he called 2 people on Harlow Auto's supply chain. Just to have a conversation. Just to mention, in the way Preston mentioned things, that he'd heard some concerns about quality control. That a friend of his had had an experience. That it might be worth reconsidering the relationship. He also placed a call to a contact at City Business Weekly who owed him a favor. Single father dating Hartwell Infrastructure CEO. Worth a story. The angle. Is she serious, or is this a PR move? The contact said he'd look into it. Preston poured himself a drink and waited. Caleb found out about the supply chain interference on a Wednesday. Dale Harlow, who owned the shop and had for 20 years, and was the kind of man who expressed concern by going very quiet, called him into the office at the end of his shift. "Merritt," Dale said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make it a bigger thing than it is." Caleb sat down. "I had 2 calls this week from suppliers, people I've worked with for years. Both of them mentioned some concerns had been raised. About us." Dale paused. "About specifically your area of work." Caleb was quiet. "I know it's not true," Dale said immediately. "I've watched you work. I'm not questioning that." Caleb nodded slowly. "I know who it is." Dale looked at him. You want to tell me? Not yet, Caleb said. Give me a few days. He called Vivienne that evening from the parking lot behind the apartment building, sitting on the tailgate of his truck while Nora did homework upstairs with Mrs. Paulson. He's going after your reputation through me, he said. Supply chain pressure. Silence on her end. Vivienne. I heard you, she said. Her voice was controlled. I'm thinking, the press thing isn't a problem if we get ahead of it, he said. The supply chain thing is going to hurt Dale, and that's not acceptable. I can make calls. No, he said. I don't want you to make calls on my behalf. That's not what this is. A pause. Then what do you want to do? She said. I want to know how much you know about Preston's business relationships. The two boards he sits on. Another pause. Why? Because I'd like to know if he's as clean as he pretends to be. Vivienne's legal team took 11 days. What they found because Vivienne knew where to look, not because she had been looking for it before, but because she understood the infrastructure of financial relationships in ways that most people in Preston's world didn't, because they assumed she was primarily a woman and secondarily a business person, when the order was actually the reverse. Preston Alt's consulting firm had received 3 payments from a logistics company called Meridian Transit Partners over the preceding 2 years. MTP was, on paper, a straightforward regional freight operation. Beneath the paper, it was structured in a way that allowed it to bid preferentially on contracts where Preston held board influence not quite illegal, depending on interpretation, but the kind of thing that became very illegal very quickly when examined by the right people. She called Caleb. I have something, she said. He came to her office for the first time. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor. He sat across from her at her conference table, and she walked him through the documents, and he listened the way she had already learned he listened, absolutely still, completely present, tracking everything. When she finished, he said, Can I ask you something? Why haven't you used this before? She looked at him. Because I didn't have a reason to look. Preston was an annoyance. He wasn't a threat. A pause until he made himself one. Caleb nodded slowly. He was looking at the documents, not at her. There's something I should tell you, he said. Okay. He looked up. The redacted portions of my service record, the firm that dug into my background, would have hit those. She kept her expression neutral. I'm aware. I spent 4 years after the Army on federal protection detail. Private sector contract, federal clients. The work I did involved understanding how certain kinds of people operate, how they apply pressure, how they cover tracks. He paused. I know how to pull a thread. She was quiet. I'm telling you this, he said, because I want to be clear about what I'm offering. I'm not a mechanic who got lucky. I'm a mechanic because I chose to be, after I'd done other things, and I can help with Preston in ways that have nothing to do with being your boyfriend. Vivienne looked at him for a long moment. Why are you offering? Because he's trying to hurt someone who employs Dale Harlow, he said. And Dale Harlow is a good man who doesn't deserve it. She almost smiled. Not because of me, also because of you, he said. Quietly, looking directly at her. But I didn't want to assume that was welcome. They met with Preston's business partner, a man named Gerald Foss, who sat on both relevant boards and who turned out, upon a phone call from Vivienne's legal team, to have been unaware of the full structure of the MTP arrangement on a Thursday afternoon. Preston received a letter that Friday. He called Vivienne immediately. He began. Goodbye, Preston, she said. She hung up. The day after, Caleb picked Nora up from school and they drove to Riverside Market, because Nora had decided she wanted to show him where she and Vivienne had walked the last time Vivienne had spent a Sunday with them, which had happened twice now and which Nora had catalogued with the thoroughness she applied to things she considered important. They walked the same path Nora had mapped in her head. She pointed out where Vivienne had stopped to look at a print in one of the market stalls, where they had shared one of those large pretzels, where Vivienne had told her, very seriously, that Margaret, the balloon poodle, was an excellent name for a balloon poodle. She remembered Margaret's name, Nora said. The second time she came, she asked how Margaret was doing. Caleb walked beside his daughter and listened. "Bah," Nora said, after a moment. "Are you going to mess this up?" He looked down at her. She looked back at him with absolute seriousness. "I might," he said honestly. "Don't," she said, and walked ahead. The board meeting was on a Tuesday. It had been called by 3 senior board members who had concerns formally stated, carefully worded concerns about the reputational implications of the CEO's personal life. The City Business Weekly piece had run. It was not defamatory. It was not even particularly unkind. It was simply the specific cruelty of making a private thing public by asking whether it was authentic. Is Hartwell's relationship with mysterious single father a genuine romance, or a calculated image reset following the alt breakup? The headline was worse than the article. Headlines always were. Vivienne had read it once and put it down and had not read it again. She sat in the boardroom at the head of the table. 12 board members. Most of them she respected. A few she trusted. All of them were looking at her. "The position," said Gerald Crane, who was 81 and had been on the board since before Vivienne's father had retired, "is simply that clarity would be helpful." "Given the timing, I understand the position," Vivienne said. "If there's a personal relationship that has the potential to become complicated, the board would benefit from understanding the parameters." "The parameters," she said carefully, "of my personal life, of your decision-making," Crane said, not unkindly. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she could say, the arrangement, the original word she'd used. One event. A strategic decision made in the aftermath of a humiliating afternoon in a public plaza. She thought about what it had actually been, from the first moment, which she had known and refused to name for 3 months because naming it felt like losing control of something she needed to control. She thought about a man sitting across a table in a market, not pushing, not filling the space, just being present in a way that she had spent her entire adult life not trusting herself to want. She thought about Nora, asking Vivienne very seriously whether she liked the sugar cone or the waffle cone better, as if the answer would reveal something important. "Gerald," she said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I'd like you to hear it as a CEO and not as a board member for 30 seconds. Crane looked at her. "All right. Caleb Merritt is not a strategic decision," she said. "He's the first person I've met in 8 years who I didn't immediately want to manage. That's not a risk to this company. That's the first real thing that's happened to me since I built this company, and I'm not going to apologize for it." The room was quiet. "As a board member," she continued, "I will note that the MTP situation was resolved without any impact to company operations, and that the individual who created the reputational question you're referencing is currently facing a separate inquiry into his own conduct. I'll have Dana send you the details." She stood. "If anyone would like to call a formal vote on my personal life, they're welcome to do that. I'll be in my office." She walked out. Caleb was in the lobby when she came down. She stopped. He was sitting in one of the chairs by the window, in his work clothes, gray t-shirt, jeans, hands folded because he had come from Harlow Auto on his lunch break, which she had not asked him to do. He stood when he saw her face. "How did it go?" he said. "I walked out of a board meeting," she said. "Okay. I may have made some decisions that are going to require follow-up conversations." "Okay," he said again, in the same tone. She looked at him. "You drove here on your lunch break." "Nora said not to mess it up," he said. "I'm taking that seriously." Vivienne laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polished, social variety she deployed at dinners and industry panels, but the actual kind, the kind that surprised her by existing. "The arrangement," she said. "The arrangement," he agreed. "I think we've gone past the arrangement." He looked at her steadily. "I know. That's going to be complicated," he said. "I know that too." She took a breath. "Nora's going to want input." "Nora is always going to want input," he said. That's who she is. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Not a confession, exactly. More an inventory. I'm very good at running things. I'm not good at— I know, he said. You keep saying that. Because I keep believing it, he said. It doesn't bother me. She looked at him for a moment. The lobby around them, the marble floor, the reception desk, the glass and steel of a building she had built from a company her father had left her at 29, and had spent 4 years almost losing, and another 4 years rebuilding into something undeniable. None of it felt like the most real thing in the room. Come back tonight, she said. For dinner, bring Nora. She'll want input on the menu, he said. I assumed, she said. Tell her we're having pasta. The Hartwell Infrastructure Group annual stakeholder dinner was held the following month at the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Black tie. 400 guests, industry figures, city officials, long-term partners, the kind of event that got covered not for the food or the speeches, but because of who attended and what they wore and who they were seen talking to. Vivian had attended this dinner every year for the past 9 years. She had delivered the same essential speech in different versions: results, vision, confidence, forward motion. She had done it perfectly each time, because she did most things perfectly. This year, she would do one thing differently. She arrived with Caleb, not quietly, not managing the moment. She walked in through the main entrance with him, and she did not let go of his arm, and she spoke to no one on the way to their table, and looked at no one who was watching with any particular expression, because she had decided somewhere between the boardroom and the lobby and a Tuesday dinner where Nora had strongly advocated for the addition of garlic bread that the specific performance of indifference was no longer a mode she had energy for. The room noticed. Rooms always noticed Vivian Hartwell, and they noticed this more. Dana, seated 2 tables over, appeared to relax slightly for the first time in 3 months. Preston Alt was not in attendance. He had declined his invitation, which had been a formality, which Dana had sent because Vivian believed in formalities even when she wasn't required. At the appropriate point in the evening, Vivian stood and delivered her speech. Results, vision, confidence, forward motion. She did it the way she always did it, precisely, without waste, with the specific authority of someone who knows the difference between performance and presence and has chosen the latter. Then she paused. A pause she hadn't planned. Or had planned only in the way that you plan things by living your way toward them without quite knowing you're doing it. I want to say one additional thing, she said, which is not in my prepared remarks. The room was very quiet. 400 people who were very good at reading rooms were reading this one intently. I spent a long time believing that the most important version of this company was the one I ran when I was only the CEO, she said. That the best way to protect something is to hold it completely alone. That the risk of letting things and people in was always greater than the benefit. A pause. I've had occasion, recently, to revise that position. She looked at Caleb. He was looking back at her from across the table with the particular expression she had come to understand was his version of being moved still and very present, and not looking away. The person who taught me that, she said, did it by crossing a plaza on a Sunday because a 7-year-old told him someone needed help. A small sound went through the room, not quite laughter. Warmer than that. I'm grateful for that, she said. And I wanted to say so publicly because I've kept too many things private for too long and I'm finding that very exhausting. She sat down. Caleb, beside her, said nothing. He reached over and put his hand over hers on the table, and she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his, and they left it that way through the rest of the evening. Afterward, late, standing outside the Whitmore Grand while the last cars were pulling away and the city was cooling into its nighttime version of itself, Caleb said, "The speech. I know," she said. "That was." "Don't," she said. "I was going to say true," he said. "I was going to say it was the most true thing I've heard someone say in a room like that." She looked at him. "Nora's with Mrs. Paulson," he said. "I know. I'd like to take a walk," he said. "If you want." "Where?" He thought about it. "Riverside Market is closed." "But the plaza's open." She laughed again, the real kind, and they walked. The plaza at midnight was empty and lit from below, the fountains still running, the sound of the city present but distant. It looked nothing like it had on a Sunday afternoon in summer, and exactly like itself. They stood where the moment had happened, more or less. "Here," Caleb said. "Approximately," she agreed. "I was out of my mind," he said. "I don't have an explanation." "Nora had an explanation," she said. "Nora always has an explanation." Vivian turned toward him. She had stopped trying to manage the progression of this, what it was, where it was going, what the parameters were, whether the risk calculation justified it. She had run the numbers and found that there were no numbers, and that the absence of numbers was not a deficit but the specific quality of the thing. "The first time," she said. "In the plaza. You asked me if I was okay." "I did." "Nobody does that," she said. "In my world, everyone assumes I'm fine, because assuming I'm fine is more convenient for them, and I've let them assume it because correcting them takes energy I use for other things." He was listening. She had learned, by now, to trust that. "You asked?" she said. "And that was—" She stopped. "That was everything. That was the whole thing, from the beginning. I just didn't have language for it." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, the same gesture as before, in the plaza, the first time, unhurried in exactly the same way. "I know," he said. "You keep saying that. I keep meaning it." And then, because it was the right moment, and they both knew it was the right moment, he kissed her again, not briefly this time, not for an audience, not for an ex-boyfriend who needed to be convinced of something, but for themselves, in an empty plaza in the middle of the night with the city doing its patient, ordinary work around them. When they pulled back, Vivienne said, "Nora is going to need to be consulted." "She's been consulting," he said. "She has opinions. They're mostly favorable." "Mostly?" "She wants to make sure you understand that Margaret, the balloon poodle, has seniority in the household. You defer to Margaret on matters of decor." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "That seems reasonable," she said. "I thought you'd say that." They walked back out of the plaza and onto the street, where the city was late and warm and entirely indifferent to the specific fact that something had been settled, and the night continued in its ordinary way, holding everything lightly, the way nights do. 3 months later, Nora informed them both, with the gravity of a person issuing a formal ruling, that Margaret the balloon poodle had been retired with full honors following a structural failure of the left ear, and that her replacement, a balloon giraffe from the same market cart, would be named Gerald. Neither Caleb nor Vivienne asked why. Some things you simply accept.